What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Drew Coat Sports Talk. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. We are back this week with a brand new one. Lots to talk about in the world of the NFL and the sports world. But before I get started, please do me a favor. Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're very active on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I was going to say MySpace, but of course that's not around. But, all the other social media platforms, we are definitely on and available from there. TikTok is obviously going away probably in the near future. So follow us on YouTube for sure. And also on Instagram. We're pretty active on there and trying to get a little bit more active in Facebook. It's just, there's so many social media channels, but anyways, wherever social media is at, we're available. Just search Drew Coat Sports Talk and you'll find it. So I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. We have a jam-packed episode. It is just me tonight. No Andrew. He is doing the school thing and the Sanger West coaching, which they, I think, are gearing up for another game coming up this week. So give him a shout out and also wish the team a good luck. And also, too, I am just doing this solo. So last week, if you guys tuned in, Michael from Boom Broadcasting had joined me. We had another kind of fun episode, and that was our third encounter or third collab. So go, watch that when you guys get an opportunity. It was a ton of fun. And also go check out those guys. They have a lot going on their channel, and they are super fun guys. I'm kind of trying to work out something to where maybe we do like a big live stream like before the Super Bowl in hopes. I think that's like in a couple of weeks. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But I think that's what I'm really trying to shoot for, because I've kind of befriended some of those guys and content creators over there, and I really like interacting with them and talking sports, and they're all a bunch of great guys. And not only that too, but just a huge shout out to any other podcasters, social media content creators on the sports realm that I have befriended essentially in this journey. I get a bunch of messages whenever news hits about the Raiders or anything like that. So all the podcasting friends that we have made, I am very appreciative and really thankful that you guys always like interact with us. And I try to get back to all those messages as quick as possible. But it's, we're building like a nice little community here. So it's great. So I really appreciate it. So if you guys want to join that Drew Code community, please follow us again on social media and on the YouTube channel. All right. Well, it's time to get into the important stuff of the show, which is, of course, the NFL, which is probably front and foremost the major news that's happening right now. Earlier this week, Ben Johnson had been hired by the Chicago Bears. Very quickly after the Detroit Lions lost to the Commanders in their divisional, NFC divisional game. As everyone saw, we'll probably talk about it later on in the show too, where that was kind of like a, pretty shocking upset for the Commanders to take out the number one NFC team. However, earlier this week, Ben Johnson had agreed to be, like I said, the new head coach for the Chicago Bears. He is replacing Matt Eberflus, who was let go in the middle of the season. And Ben Johnson was a very huge prominent name that was in NFL coaching circles, obviously along with Aaron Glenn, who we'll talk about in a minute. But Ben Johnson was top tier number one head coaching candidate for a lot of people. If there was a head coaching position that was open, he was probably on a lot of people's lists, except for the Patriots. They clearly had their eyes on Mike Vrabel, which they were the first team to fire their coach and to hire another one. So Patriots did that. But however, moving back to Ben Johnson, the last few seasons that he was with the Detroit Lions, with having the number one scoring offense, their offensive output has been historical on a lot of fronts for, the last couple of years that he was their offensive coordinator. And of course that made him the most attractable candidate. And so the Chicago Bears coming in with some decent weapons. They still have DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Romeo Dunze, who was a rookie this season. He'll be in his second year when obviously the new season turns over. Caleb Williams, who was a rookie, who will be in his second year. So I'm curious to see how Ben Johnson does with that. And some of the reasons like that I obviously talk about this is because before the Lions had even played against the Commanders, obviously the way that the NFL works when it comes with coaching circles is if a team, certain coaches can't, take interviews or interview for any opening jobs in person. They're all kind of virtual. So, the Raiders dominantly were in the news about having virtually interviewed Ben Johnson, and there was a lot of smoke coming out from Raiders camp, whether it be beat writers or, Adam Scheffler or Schefter, excuse me, or name the outlet or whatever, seeing it on social media, seeing it on X or Threads or Instagram. I saw a lot. I even shared some of those on our Instagram stories as well, where it looked like Ben Johnson was a foregone conclusion to the Las Vegas Raiders because, all signs pointed to that, where, even though the Raiders didn't have a quarterback, they had cap space. Tom Brady was looking to bring in somebody that was going to help lead the Raiders into a new era. Also, looking for a GM, really kind of paving the way for if Ben Johnson had a GM that he was looking to bring in, kind of opening up that lane for that, essentially. And then I think Ben Johnson was hired on Tuesday. So the Detroit Lions, lose on, actually, no, I think it was on a Monday. Maybe it was Monday or Tuesday of this week. Anyways, point being is Detroit Lions lose on Saturday night against the Commanders. And by Monday or Tuesday, the news is announced that Ben Johnson obviously was hired by the Chicago Bears. And then you're hearing reports coming out that the Las Vegas Raiders actually weren't even on his preferred list. Like, he took interviews with them and all that stuff, but all the discussion about the Raiders being the favorite or potentially, hiring him as soon as they're allowed to, turns out wasn't actually, no, I wouldn't say not true, but there wasn't really any there wasn't really anything that was going to come about that, and Adam Scheffler was one that made it very clear that he's not sold on Ben Johnson to the Raiders. He's a lot of respected journalists or analysts or insiders that, go on like ESPN or FS1. They did point out, don't rule out Chicago, don't rule out Chicago. And I think a lot of us were like, oh, Chicago, that, they had a terrible season and who knows what they're going to do. We don't know what we're getting out of Caleb Williams. And no, it seems like Chicago was, very attractive to Ben Johnson because Caleb Williams, who knows what he can do with that roster, with draft capital. It is kind of curious, though. Ryan Poles, who is their GM, he's been their GM for several years. He was also responsible for keeping Matt Eberflus probably longer than he should have been. And now curious to see how he works with Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson had a presser where, he stays within the NFC North, which is kind of peculiar because you would have thought that maybe he wanted out of the division or at least go somewhere that is not in the North. He stays in the NFC North where it was ultra competitive. Truthfully, the only team that was not competitive at a certain point in the season were the Chicago Bears. And so, Ben Johnson's going to come in and try to get them competitive. And I think he's trying to spark some enthusiasm within the fan base and the team to just let him know, like, hey, yeah, there was other places that probably have other things that I could have worked with as well, but I chose to stay in the NFC North, not only to play, Green Bay twice, not only to play Minnesota twice, but also he gets to play the Detroit Lions twice. So we'll see how this all shakes out. Whole off season to see what players are brought in, what his offensive scheme is going to look like. So we'll see. I think, good for Ben Johnson. We'll see if he is as good of a head coach as he says he is. I mean, I've seen some articles that come out that are kind of titling it like, is Ben Johnson like a Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan, or is he like an Adam Gase? And Adam Gase, for those that don't remember, I think he was the Broncos OC for a couple of seasons when Peyton Manning was there. And really, he got hired by the New York Jets because people thought that he was able to run a team because he looked like he was a good OC with Peyton Manning. But it's Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning's going to make anybody look good. And when Adam Gase, of course, got into the New York Jets, that team was awful. And nothing's really changed, but still, it was pretty bad under Adam Gase, who was supposed to be this hotshot coach and didn't turn out to be anything. So we'll see where Ben Johnson lands. I don't think he's going to be in that realm. I think he'll be probably closer to the, a good coordinator, maybe a good head coach. As far as success, I don't know. To be truthful, even if he gets the Bears like above 500, maybe even to a wild card berth, I think that's pretty successful considering the years that they've been struggling and, haven't been truthfully relevant. So now they get, a hot shot head coach and they get like the best quarterback that they've probably ever had in their franchise talent-wise. So we'll see what they do with it. So moving on to more NFL news, staying in the head coaching realm, along with Ben Johnson, who was the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, their defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, also found a head coaching gig. He was hired by the New York Jets. He used to be a Jet way back in the day, and now he is brought in with no GM. So he is the first hire in the new regime, which a lot of NFL insiders are really having positive things to say, and actually have a little bit more enthusiasm with Aaron Glenn about how he can turn around organizations or how he'll be as a head coach. And I'm not saying that in comparison to Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn. I'm just saying Ben Johnson obviously was the number one candidate for a lot of people because teams are kind of moving offensively. And so Ben Johnson by default is the most attractive name that's out there. But Aaron Glenn is another name that was out there because of what he did with the Detroit Lions defense, able to really having so many of the prominent defensive players for the Lions on the IR for majority of the year and losing a lot of them. Aaron Glenn was still able to get that defense to respond and, get the best out of his players. And that in and of itself is super impressive. And so now he gets an opportunity to take over the New York Jets job to see if he can turn around that culture. A lot of questions about what they're going to do with certain players like Aaron Rodgers. I saw something come out on ESPN that there are sources saying that Aaron Glenn doesn't really intend to let go of Aaron Rodgers, probably wants to retain him for that last year because we'll see what the Jets do in the draft. It's probably looking like they may draft a quarterback or a successor and see what they do with that. But Aaron Glenn to me kind of reminds me of when the New York Jets hired Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh was, by all intents and purposes, he was one of the top head coaching names that was out there. And he was also a defensive coordinator. I did think that Robert Saleh was somebody that could help turn around the New York Jets. I had high hopes for him. He started off kind of hot. And I think this last season with the whole Aaron Rodgers saga really just sunk the ship, so to speak. I'm not saying that Aaron Glenn is going to be anything like Robert Saleh. This is just reminding me of that. Like there's a lot of high hopes for Aaron Glenn that's coming into the New York Jets, and they need a complete overhaul in terms of culture, how things are operated and everything like that. So hopefully Aaron Glenn can establish that, lock it down, get some good coordinators because, Colin Cowherd earlier today made a really good point that the league, even though it's offensive centric, it looks like that you get a young quarterback with a defensive minded, strong coach who is more of a culture setting and discipline and all that stuff. Seems to work out better than if you have, a young quarterback with a hot shot OC now turned head coach, even though it's an offensive friendly league. It's just something about having, a defensive minded head coach with that presence and that, culture that they're implementing with a younger quarterback just seems to work. Like D'Amico Ryans with CJ Stroud was a great example. Just recently with the Commanders, you got Dan Quinn with Jaden Daniels, which is another one. So I'm curious to see what Aaron Glenn does. Who knows who the Jets draft or whatnot. I mean, they need to still find a GM and they need to see what their player personnel kind of looks like and how they evaluate. And so we'll see. But I actually think that this is a pretty good hire for the Jets overall. I think Aaron Glenn can bring a different kind of mentality and at least get the Jets out of despair. What's difficult, though, is that Woody Johnson, who is the owner, with the article that came out about one of his teenage sons, kind of making roster decisions based on Madden ratings, and that news article that came out, that's going to be kind of tough to really kind of steer the conversation and also the reputation that has occurred from that. That's going to be a tricky thing that Aaron Glenn is going to have to navigate. But hopefully with the GM is going to be the one that kind of helps get the front office in order. Aaron Glenn will take care of the player side of it with the coaching. We'll see if this gets a little bit organized, and let's see if, Woody Johnson can at least just, hey man, be a silent owner and just sit over there and let the people that are in the NFL kind of know what they're doing and stop letting players run your operation, trust some of the guys that you got in there and see what happens. So we'll see if Woody Johnson has made the right decision in hiring Aaron Glenn, and let's see how this turns out. But that kind of means that the top two coaching candidates that the Raiders were essentially kind of targeting. I don't imagine that the Raiders weren't also looking at Aaron Glenn as a potential head coach hire for the organization. Earlier today, too, I'll just say this real quickly, that the Raiders did hire John Spytek, who was the assistant GM to the Buccaneers. He was with that organization since 2016. I have some notes here to talk about that. And he has also worked under head coaches like Mike Holmgren, Andy Reid. I think Gary Kubiak was another one. So he's been around the player personnel, the executive level since I think it's 2004 is like kind of when he started an internship. So in 2016, when he was kind of brought on to the Buccaneers as a player personnel, obviously he was somebody that worked within that front office that also kind of helped bring in Tom Brady amongst other draft picks and picking up other players. So, he does have the ability to find players, to connect, and also to within the Buccaneers organization, they've been known to like really help incentivize players to get the best out of them. And when there's an incentive coming up, they make it a point to try to do their best to reach that incentive. So I'm curious what Spytek does. A thing that I read too, because the news was broken by Paul Gertes. One of the things that was in there was that Mark Davis made it a point that he did not want to hire a first-year GM and a first-time head coach. So with that being said, with now having John Spytek, who is now on the GM side, so we found the replacement to Tom Telesco, who, by the way, I'm not sure if Tom Telesco should have been let go after the first year, but that's fine. We're past that now. So I've got 4 head coaching candidates that I think that the Raiders should go for and who I think have the best possibility of getting the job. And again, some of the metrics I've kind of measured on is, are you a previous head coach? And also to what style or what are they bringing to the Raiders that the Raiders do need? Because again, I'm going to be very honest about my position of this. I did not agree with the Raiders letting go of Antonio Pierce after his first full season as the head coach without the interim tag. I don't think they gave him enough time. Tom Telesco, one of the things that I did not like is some of the reports are true, which is that wasn't even a call given to Washington to see if they were interested in trading down from the number 2 to see if they can go up there and capture, Jaden Daniels. Now, again, not to default Tom Telesco for not even trying. Maybe Washington just made it clear we're not interested in trading away this pick. So, why try if they're not interested? So I can get that. Although I do think that Tom Telesco could have found good talent given like maybe another season. But again, I don't know what the inner workings were with the Raiders. Maybe the fact that Tom Brady coming in does change the fact that Tom Brady, Mark Davis, they want to completely overhaul what the Raiders have been doing and maybe now change things in terms of bringing in different people with different cultures and mindsets. And also too, with the head coach, maybe bringing in one with experience and rather than maybe the hotshot head coach. So I think that kind of brings things into clarity a little bit. So here are my 4 candidates that I think would be good head coaches, or at least good options for the head coach. One of them, this is actually going to make Michael with Boom Broadcasting a little upset. Well, not a little upset. He may not like this. I think Mike McCarthy would be a good choice. And here's why. Again, head coach of the Green Bay Packers, led them to the Super Bowl, made multiple times of winning their own division, getting into the playoffs. Is his playoff record as good as we would want? No. But here's the thing. He's gotten into the playoffs. And also, too, when he took over for the Dallas Cowboys, I think he got them to 3 consecutive 12-win seasons. And the season essentially that now he is departed from Dallas, they were pretty much out of the running for any wild card berth for a while. But, even with Dak Prescott being injured, even with a defense that was injured, he was able to coach them up to where they ended on a pretty respectable level. And, it could have been a lot worse, all things considered. But Mike McCarthy has shown that he could help turn around a team at different stages of where they're at. So he helped, grow the Green Bay Packers and get them into a championship caliber team. And then obviously being a prominent NFC team for several seasons after that. Then when he took over Dallas, they had won the NFC East, I think once or twice. And then obviously they were a highly touted team. The only thing that faltered them is when they got into the playoffs or anything like that. Of course, that was where they would falter. I think Mike McCarthy would be an interesting one. Obviously, he's been around the league for several years. I think what he would bring would be obviously a huge veteran presence in terms of head coaching and culture and getting guys to buy in. He is more of an offensive minded, so I'm curious to see how that'll go because obviously he has Brock Bowers. We need to figure out what we're doing with the running back position. We have a young offensive line that we'll probably add to within the draft, but we don't have a quarterback. So with that number 6 pick, are we going to go with a certain player? Are we going to trade up from there? Are we going to trade down to get multiple picks? That's another question. So I think Mike McCarthy is a really good option for the Raiders. Will he take the job? Probably not. He's probably going to go to a place that has more of a structured like quarterback already in place, maybe some foundational pieces, and he's just maybe going to add to it. But I would like the Raiders to at least entertain or think about bringing in Mike McCarthy, even if we may not get it. I think that's a good one. Another one, which is actually kind of funny because Drew, a couple weeks ago when he was on with me, he had a conspiracy theory about the reason why we didn't hire Kliff Kingsbury was because of this and that. And now that AP's out, we can bring in Kingsbury. And that's an interesting one. So I think another good candidate would be Kliff Kingsbury. And here's why. Previous head coach experience with the Arizona Cardinals has already stated how he's learned a lot. The fact that he has helped coach Jaden Daniels and his play calling in the game with Detroit Lions and throughout the whole season, to me, has shown some huge growth and maturity. He's not just this hotshot coach that essentially got handed a head coaching job when probably didn't need it. And now that he's a coordinator on the NFL level, he's shown that he can play call. And also too, like maybe now with that learned experience in Arizona, take that over to Vegas, seeing if that can also change. I will say though, this fan base is very, very hard to coach for and play for because we are so quick to just say it's not working, get it out of here, and we don't give it time. So I think Kliff Kingsbury is an interesting one for the sheer fact that, again, it fits Mark Davis's criteria. It's a young coach, offensive predicate, kind of a little bit of a John Gruden type of situation where it's a young coach, offensive minded. We'll see. This third one has no head coaching experience to start, but I think from where they come from, I think is interesting to bring in what they've been doing because Joe Brady, who's another one who I think would be very, very interesting as a head coaching candidate for the Raiders, has been with the Buffalo Bills for a while, coaching under Josh Allen with that expectation that Sean McDermott has placed in Buffalo to where they are an AFC playoff team almost every year. Granted, like, maybe getting knocked out of the wild card or divisional round, whatever the case may be. But I think that Joe Brady bringing in that into the Raiders organization would be very interesting. I know that he's a name that's kind of circling. He may wind up somewhere else, which is probably the more likely option. But I think even though it doesn't really fit Mark Davis's idea of what he would like with a first-time head coach and a first-time GM, I think that Spytek having enough experience as an assistant GM with the Buccaneers could maybe suffice with the type of experience that he's earned that maybe Mark Davis would sign off on getting Joe Brady, if Joe Brady, for some reason did really well in, interviews and whatnot and see how that all turns out. Although I feel like Joe Brady is going to end up somewhere else, but I think this would be a good candidate for the Raiders. And the last one, and this one is probably turned into the front runner for a lot of Raiders fans recently, and this is again after the Ben Johnson news, is Pete Carroll. Now, again, Pete Carroll, for those that remember, used to coach at USC, came over to the NFL coaching the Seattle Seahawks, helped them win a Super Bowl with a young Russell Wilson and the Legion of Boom way back when. Of course, like since the Legion of Boom kind of, aged out and new players have come in, Pete Carroll still had the Seahawks pretty relevant for, some wild card berths, some divisional games, some seasons missing the playoffs. The season essentially that he was in his last season, Seattle was a pretty comparable team. And it looked like when Seattle parted ways with Pete Carroll, it was kind of a shock to Pete Carroll. So it sounds like he still had a lot of fire in him. He's now had a whole season off. Now, granted, Pete Carroll's more of a defensive kind of style head coach. That's really like what he prides himself in terms of that side of the ball. But I think what makes Pete Carroll attractive for the Raiders, and I think he would be my number one candidate if I was the Raiders. He's really the only head coach that comes to mind outside of Mike McCarthy that can go into our AFC West division where you have Andy Reid, Sean Payton. You also have John Harbaugh, or is it Jim or John? I think it's Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh. Excuse me. I always get the brothers mixed up. It's Jim. So you have Jim Harbaugh in there as well. And then you bring in Pete Carroll, who Pete Carroll has had battles with Jim Harbaugh, has had battles with Andy Reid, has had battles with Sean Payton. And so he is the one coach that is probably still out there in NFL circles outside of some other coach that becomes available for some odd reason. He's probably the only coach with a huge reputation that can deliver on changing the culture, understanding how the front office situation works, player evaluation, elevating players up and having them coach, coaching them up and bringing in a staff that he can trust to help facilitate better quality of coaching, play calling, would just be something that the Raiders haven't had since, I would say, honestly, Jack Del Rio. And Jack Del Rio didn't really have success in Jacksonville when he was there, but the success that he did have with the Raiders, this is when we had Derek Carr in 2016, where we won 12 games. It's going to remind me of that, where there's actually some experience and some culture developing and building. I think Pete Carroll can get in there and do it. I wouldn't say relatively fast, but I think he can turn it around pretty quickly, a lot quicker than what Raider fans probably were hoping for with Antonio Pierce. I think Pete Carroll is a really, really good candidate, and I would actually like to see how he works with Tom Brady, who, again, they met in the Super Bowl where the Patriots were able to beat out the Seahawks. But, with Tom Brady, with John Spytek, with that experience, and then with Pete Carroll, I'm curious to see how that regime would do when it comes to drafting, player development, coaching coordinators that they could bring in, schemes, all that sort of stuff. I think that's a very interesting thing. However, I think with having John Spytek, and if we did bring in Pete Carroll, and who knows, news can break tomorrow regarding Pete Carroll going somewhere else or going with the Raiders. We have a lot of questions that we have to answer about certain players that the contracts are up. Max Crosby is a big notable one. He's got no guarantee money left on his current deal. Are we re-signing him? Are we going to trade him? Or, is he going to be a cap casualty? Also, too, who are we going to sign in free agency? I think. What are we doing at the quarterback position? Are we going to, do our best to trade up into the top 3 picks or a top 2 pick to get a quarterback? So I think those are all very interesting, intricate questions that I have as a Raiders fan. But ultimately, having John Spytek helps that in the 4 candidates that I had mentioned with Kingsbury, Mike McCarthy, Joe Brady, and Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll specifically would probably be one of the better coaches that we can bring in, regardless of age. I think he's 73 either next month in February or I think at the end of January, I think he'll be 73. Regardless if he's the oldest coach in the league, he has a lot of coaching experience left. And I think that we need somebody that can compete in the division. And I think Pete Carroll would be the guy for that. So I would go with that. All right, so let's move on to the divisional round. Obviously the divisional round was a lot of fun. I don't know about you guys, but Saturday games were phenomenal. Sunday games were great. I was able to text with a lot of the Boom guys because we're on kind of like a DM thing. And then with Drew, of course, we were texting back and forth a ton about the Eagles game. And with the Ravens and the Baltimore Bills, the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills game. But, of course, going to go over it quickly. In the divisional games, obviously we saw that the Chiefs at home beat up the Texans. Some calls that were questionable on the ref side that favored, maybe perception is that they favored the Chiefs side, and they possibly did. I think that there was at least 2 calls that, had they not been called, probably keep the momentum on the Houston Texans side. But again, I think ultimately the Chiefs were going to win, in my opinion. I think they just had the stronger roster. I think it just would have been a tougher bout for them because that Houston Texans defense was getting after it. And I think with a lot of questionable calls where the ref bailed out the Chiefs benefited from it. But with no doubt, I think the Chiefs are probably at their healthiest, and scary enough, I think are probably at their strongest at the moment right now, because they got players back like Hollywood Brown is now back. Obviously, they still have Xavier Worthy, who can take the top off of defense. You have DeAndre Hopkins, who is a route aficionado, which is really great. Travis Kelce, who is arguably now one of the best tight ends to ever play the game, or starting to get in the territory of being the best to ever play the game. You have Patrick Mahomes, of course, and you know what he does. This defense is still very, very good. So scary enough, with all the one-score games that the Chiefs have won, been lucky, it's more or less of they're just well coached, they're better prepared, they're battle tested, and scary enough, I think that they're turning ahead and starting to become better than they've been all season. Because like I had told Michael, and I've even mentioned this to Drew, their real season, what they're really playing for, started on Saturday when they played the Houston Texans. And now, as Buffalo is going to come into Kansas, which we'll talk about again later on in the show, that is going to be huge, and that battle's going to be great. And I think Buffalo is going to get probably their toughest matchup of the Chiefs that they've seen out of now 5 matchups that they're going to have, or the 4th matchup I think upcoming that the Buffalo Bills are going to have. And then of course we had a very fun NFC divisional game that we talked about. We had the Commanders shocking the Lions. Jared Goff, unfortunately, I think he threw 2 interceptions and there was a fumble, so he had 3 turnovers in and of himself. Commanders, though, with their play calling, with their defense, able to turn turnovers into points, very pivotal. You can tell, obviously, Detroit was playing catch up the entire game because they fell behind very quickly, very early, kind of went away from the run game a little bit. But also, as the game was wearing on, there was just no sense of urgency for Detroit. It looked like that they were just thinking that they were going to find points here and there. And truthfully, that Commanders defense really put it on the Detroit Lions to really disrupt the timing of Jared Goff. And also, too, like when Jared Goff would throw up these passes that he probably shouldn't have tried to thread it through, and he's gotten lucky before, the Commanders were able to just, make him pay for it. And with those turnovers, they turned them into points. And you saw the score of how it was. And Commanders, for the most part, were able to control that game. At no point did it feel like, oh, the Detroit Lions were going to take we're going to take it back over, that shifting over. Throughout the entire game, Jaden Daniels played very poised for a rookie. This is what's interesting is last year we did have CJ Stroud that did have a very good rookie season, got all the way to the divisional round, played well. Obviously they lost. But with Jaden Daniels, he seems to be more poised. Like as the moments get bigger, he seems to feel like more of a veteran, calm down, take what's in front of him, understands like what he needs to do to not put his team in a situation, not throwing too many terrible passes or making terrible decisions with reads. If anything, is playing very, very well within the confines or within how the flow of the game is going. Very, very impressive for, it seems like, an even more mature rookie quarterback than what we thought was mature with CJ Stroud last season. Seems like Jaden Daniels is even further along than that. And I was texting Jason Colenso, who is the host for 3 from Deep podcast that's also on the Boom Network. We were just talking about that, Jaden Daniels probably has locked down the offensive rookie of the year, and he's not going to win it, but there's a conversation that could be had that Jaden Daniels will probably get a couple of votes for MVP, because realistically, you take Jaden Daniels away, that team is not nearly as big of a threat. And even though Jaden Daniels is a rookie, there was just something about him being on the field in that team, and he's changed how the Commanders are played now. He adds this element of passing and running, and he's just a far better quarterback than what they had. Even when they had RG3, Jaden Daniels just seems to be a bit better than what they even had, even with RG3. So I think that's phenomenal with what the Commanders are doing. And with Detroit, I think what's difficult is Detroit now, they've got to figure out what they're going to do. They're losing both offensive and defensive coordinators. Maybe they promote from within, maybe they hire from another team and try to retool all this. But, what are you going to do with Jared Goff? Jared Goff, obviously, as people remember, the reason why he's on Detroit is because he couldn't win with the Rams. Now, when he was with the Rams and they got all the way to the Super Bowl and they played the Patriots, as a super low scoring game. No offense was able to really kind of get moving for the Rams. Really, the Patriots defense shut that down. Jared Goff, obviously, in that game was not able to throw the ball, and pretty pedestrian, to be honest. And so that prompted the Lions to trade away Jared Goff, and they got Matthew Stafford and some other picks in return, where Matthew Stafford had then delivered a Super Bowl for the Rams. And up to this day, you see that the LA Rams have won this trade up to this point between the Detroit Lions and the LA Rams of all the pick swaps. And I think we talked about this a little bit on my appearance with Boom Broadcasting, and again with all those other guys. I don't want to keep mentioning them, but all these great conversations and all these great points were being made on their show. That's why I'm talking so highly of them, that you guys should go subscribe to their channel. But point being, though, is the trade that happened between the Lions and the LA Rams. The Rams clearly have won that, because when they got Matthew Stafford, immediately they won the Super Bowl. And then they obviously made repeat entries in the playoffs in the wild card and the divisional round. In fact, in the divisional round that I'll talk about shortly, they did lose to the Eagles, but argument could be made is they were very close to winning that, just with a couple of different key plays. But Detroit is going to have to figure out what they want to do with Jared Goff. Is he the quarterback that they're going to continue to have? It looks like he still has a lot of support from a lot of the players, because take away this game, unfortunately, this game, which was probably their most important game that Detroit needed to have, because you have a 14-win season. You set a franchise record for most consecutive wins, all these great accolades and history, things that you've made within your franchise. And unfortunately, you were a first round out. And sure, put that at the feet of Jared Goff. Also, it could be because of injuries of the defense and other components that maybe had changed that, because Jared Goff wasn't the only one that threw an interception in that game. Play calling maybe took into a factor of that as well. But, do the Detroit Lions believe that they can win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff? A couple of weeks ago, when I had Michael on, I posed a question that if the Detroit Lions did not move on or whatever, if they didn't win a Super Bowl this year, will they ever get back? Is this the only season of opportunity to make it to a Super Bowl? And you think about it, like they had, I think, top 3 defense in the NFL. They had the number 1 offense in the NFL. They had all these great players. They had Sonic and Knuckles, the metaphorical running back duo that they had. Amon St. Brown. You had Jameis Williams that finally has flourished from the time that they drafted him. Sam Laporta, a phenomenal offensive line. All these great pieces, both sides of the ball. Again, setting the franchise record for most wins in a season, win streak, all that other kind of stuff, beating opponents by 50-plus points some weeks, like multiple weeks in a row. And yet, again, you were a first round out. And in my opinion, I don't know if Detroit is going to get back to as far as they got. And again, my sample size of that is, if you look at when the Philadelphia Eagles went to the Super Bowl just a couple of seasons ago, they lost coordinators from both sides of the ball. They were still able to make the playoffs based on essentially their talent, but they couldn't get hardly anywhere. And you can tell that they were still rebounding from not having their prominent defensive and offensive coordinator that helped get them to, the Super Bowl. And they then, you can see, took a huge regression back. And I see that happening for the Detroit Lions. The only problem with the Detroit Lions is I don't know what they could do to really push themselves back into that contender line, so to speak, of the NFC, because now you have the Commanders. Next season, what do the Cowboys look like? Next season, what do Minnesota look like? What does Chicago now look like? Now you've got a very competitive NFC conference. And, this could be essentially as far as they go in the iteration that they're in. And can Dan Campbell rally the guys to get back from there? What coordinators are going to come in to really help elevate this team? That's a huge question. So I don't know if I foresee the Detroit Lions being Super Bowl contenders as favored as they were this season. I think this is probably the closest that they get, unless something monumental happens or something. But I don't know if Detroit is going to get any further than what they just went. Even though the year prior they lost to in the conference championship, now they lose in the divisional round after they secured a first round bye, which is not great. So I don't know. I don't know if Detroit gets any further than where they were obviously this season. This, in my opinion, was probably their best chance for everything, because even in the year that they made it to the conference championship a year prior, they weren't the number one offense. They weren't the number one defense. They were great on both sides of the ball. This season, though, they seem to have elevated to elite level on both sides of the ball, and yet it wasn't enough. They came across a team that was hungrier than them, that was more prepared, had all the elements to upset them, and Detroit Lions just couldn't do it. So anyways, next AFC game that was in the divisional round, obviously was a huge matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. This one was probably one of the funner games to see. It had all the drama you wanted, good defense, offenses that just wouldn't give each other an inch. Obviously, Lamar Jackson having a couple of turnovers, Mark Andrews having the fumble and also the drop 2-point conversion, which essentially is what they lost by. Your heart goes out to Mark Andrews, because all season, on a fantasy perspective, he was relatively quiet for a lot of the year, kind of comes out of it, kind of battled throughout the entire year in getting like looks and catches. And then obviously as the season wore on for the Ravens, was a huge part in their offense. And then you get into this game, and when the Ravens really needed a play to be converted, couldn't do it. And I know this is probably going to go against Lamar Jackson more than anything. And, for the most part, Lamar Jackson played really, really well. Obviously, you don't want to turn the ball over at any point. But to be truthful, I had already picked the Bills. And it wasn't because I didn't think the Ravens were ready. I just think that the Bills have been here before. They were probably the most prepared. Now, one of the things that the Bills had done is they really just ran the ball a ton. Like obviously it was a snowy type of game, so they weren't really trying to turn the ball over, but they protected the ball. So Josh Allen, rather than throwing for 300 and something yards, only passed for like 120, I think was the number. However, ran the ball considerably more, protected it, of course, and then was able to score on drives where they needed it the most. Ravens just couldn't seem to really get over the top with the Bills, and credit the Bills defense for being prepared for them. I will say, though, what saved the Bills is the Ravens really not going back to Derrick Henry when they needed to. Derrick Henry, in my opinion, when on some of those goal line fronts, or rather than the Ravens throwing it 3 times, should have just handed the ball straight to Derrick Henry, because ironically enough, they got to the goal line because of Derrick Henry. And I don't know what the play called for a passing situation on, probably 4-down territory. You throw it 3 times rather than like give it to Derrick Henry and let him bulldoze his way into the end zone, which is how you got to the goal line in the first place. So a lot of questionable play calling on the Ravens side, which probably cost them. But also on the Bills side, what's concerning is they just didn't seem aggressive to want to put away the Ravens. Maybe it was playing with a lead and they were just, making sure that they milked as much time and they didn't turn the ball over to give them a scoring opportunity. But, when it looked like the Bills should try to put away the Ravens, they were just more or less trying to, they were just doing their best to play safe football. And when you go against the Chiefs, who we're gonna talk about their AFC Championship matchup shortly, you can't play safe. You got to take some risk, because they are going to absolutely take the risks on you as well. And you're not going to win. You're not going to beat the Chiefs playing safe football, is what I'll say. And I think that is, there's only one other game. Of course, that was a Saquon Barkley game. So I call it the Saquon Barkley game because he rushed again for over 200 plus yards in the snow against the LA Rams. And earlier this season, if those remember, when the LA Rams and the Philadelphia Eagles met up with each other early in the regular season, that was when Saquon Barkley had, I think, his highest rushing total of the season at like 230 something yards and obviously a couple of touchdowns. Basically duplicated that same thing again for the Eagles and essentially single-handedly won them their playoff matchup. A couple of things I'm concerned with the Eagles, though, is obviously they're Saquon Barkley heavy, which the talent of Saquon Barkley cannot be matched. Like, there is no reason why they shouldn't go away from Saquon Barkley. But what I'm concerned with is, one, Jalen Hurts injured his knee. Don't know the severity of it, but obviously when he went back into the game after he had his knee injury, or at least the injury sustained to his knee, immobile, couldn't get out of the way. Obviously, there was a safety at one point in the game that the Rams had on the Eagles, and that was because when the Eagles were in their own territory and Jalen Hurts dropped back into the end zone, he had no mobility to get out of the way as the Eagles pass rush was able to get to him, and obviously that's where the safety took place. If Jalen Hurts was healthy, he's rushing out of that pocket and he's not getting tackled in the end zone. But something happened with his knee. I don't know what it's going to affect him like when he plays the Commanders this upcoming weekend. I'm sure that's going to be a big topic of conversation probably tomorrow, or as we get closer to that matchup. I'm sure that's going to be a big prevalent thing that is focused on. But I think what I'm concerned with the Eagles that I saw in their divisional game is really no passing game. Non-existent. And for the weapons that they have with Devonta Smith, with A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, against Saquon Barkley, and I know they have some other pretty good outside receiver weapons like to kind of help balance out like in terms of depth. Still, like Jalen Hurts, just for some reason, and I know that he's not I know he's not a quarterback that goes based on timing, where he's going to a quick route and timing it or anything like that. He doesn't really need timing to get going. It's more rollouts and off-schedule throws that he's really his specialty. But I think what's concerning is whatever the game plan is that Kellen Moore has put together, Saquon Barkley is bailing them out, which is great. But you're going to need Jalen Hurts to make throws that are going to matter in the game as well. Like, is he going to be able to hit the open guy? Can he make all the throws on the field that are going to make the difference? Because the Commanders, what they did to Jared Goff is they really took away that part of the field. And if the Commanders turn the Eagles one-dimensional, and I'm not saying Jalen Hurts can't throw the football at all. Obviously, he's a Pro Bowler. He's been in the Super Bowl. He was an MVP candidate, during the Super Bowl run, and he's a good quarterback. I think he's very good. I think he throws the ball better than people give him credit for. But what's been concerning the last two games, especially the wild card game and the divisional game, is there is no continuity, it seems like, with this passing game. And that's what's kind of concerning is in the NFL, in this type, you're going to throw the ball. You're going to have to throw the ball. You cannot just only run the ball. Now, don't get me wrong. They will run Saquon Barkley until he cannot run no more, which is a given fact. But with how football has always been, is you have the run game that facilitates then the play action, which also opens up other things for other players and other parts of the field. And that's when you got to get the ball open to the open guy or throw with anticipation or whatever the case may be. But can Jalen Hurts do that? Can A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts take over a game when Saquon Barkley is met with resistance on the front or it can't get to the second level? Like, what can the Eagles do offensively to not look like all they're going to rely on is Saquon Barkley? Because if they could unlock the full offense of it, they could be a very scary team that can get very far. And argument could be made that they could get to the Super Bowl because they are the most experienced. They've been to the Super Bowl once before. And what they really need to do is they really need to dial in the offense, because that defense is what's holding down the fort for everything. When the Rams, I believe it was in the third quarter, were driving on the Eagles were able to cause a fumble with Kyren Williams, and that swung the momentum, because then you saw Saquon Barkley was able to take it for a touchdown, amongst obviously the 78-yard touchdown that you see going around all over social media. But the point being is they were able to create turnover opportunities that turned into points. But what was happening, though, is when that defense is on the field a ton, they're giving up a lot of the field as well to the opposing team, and they can't always bail out the offense. The offense has got to do something to really get some momentum on the offensive side in terms of passing. And I'm curious to see. I'm sure the Eagles, with their experience, will figure it out. Will it look good enough, though, to get them into the Super Bowl? Because I don't think the Commanders are a team that they can play safe with. I think the Commanders have nothing to lose. They have a rookie quarterback. They have a first-year head coach in Dan Quinn, who has gotten his team to the Super Bowl once before when he was with the Atlanta Falcons. You have Kliff Kingsbury. Now, this is his first time in the playoffs and also this deep into the playoffs with this much at stake. So how can he call up or game plan? So there's a lot of questions into that. But, the Commanders have really nothing to lose. They have no sense. They have no expectations on what they should or shouldn't do, because they shouldn't have been this far to begin with. They should have lost, all respect. They should have lost to the Lions. They should have lost to the Minnesota Vikings, or not the Minnesota Vikings, the team that was in Tampa Bay. They should have lost to Tampa Bay. They should have not been this far, and yet they are. And you look at the Eagles. The Eagles had the number one defense. They brought in Nick Fangio, who has turned around that defense. They brought in Kellen Moore from a divisional rival who has made that offense better, and brought in Saquon Barkley. They've added all these defensive pieces, bolstered up the offense as well in that line for them to not look like their full self, which is either scary or concerning for them. So we'll see how they look. So we're going to move on to talking about some, obviously, the conference championship games. So the first one is the Commanders and the Eagles. What I'm going to say here is I'm going to go with the Eagles on this game. I'm not sure what the line is. I didn't really put that in my notes or anything like that. But just looking at, Commanders are traveling over to Philadelphia. The last game that they played, I believe, was, I want to say week 17 or week 18. And the Commanders beat the Eagles on that one. I think the Commanders, I don't want to keep picking against them because I picked against them with Detroit and Detroit lost. But I was also saying earlier this season that the Philadelphia Eagles could be an NFC team that gets back into the Super Bowl because they have the experience, they have the player personnel, and they have the coaching behind them. And in my opinion, I don't think experience is overrated. I think it's justified. So in my opinion, for the NFC Championship game, I'm going to go with the Eagles to beat the Commanders. It's at home, and it's not that because I don't think the Commanders can keep up. I just think there's something with the experience. We've never seen a rookie quarterback in the Super Bowl for, I think, a particular reason. And I just think that there is a little bit more that the Eagles have that could topple over the Commanders. Now, we'll see when this game takes place because, again, they're NFC East rivals. So I'm curious to see what the Commanders do in terms of game plan. But ultimately, I think I'm going to go with the Eagles on this game. And then, and I don't want to disparage the NFC matchup with the AFC matchup, but let's be honest, with the AFC matchup, we have the regular season champions, so to speak. Buffalo Bills are going against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are two-time defending champions, looking to three-peat. Never been done before. Buffalo Bills are traveling into Kansas City to play the Chiefs. This is going to be a huge slugfest. Looking at like preparation, personnel, and again, just really quickly, what I'm feeling in this particular game is, even though the Bills have probably played their best football this season, like they seem to be a more formidable team, their defense has been playing better, even though they don't feel like that they have a ton of weapons, they feel like that their running game could really open up a lot more passing game. And Josh Allen, even in the game with Baltimore, you felt like he can do more. Who knows how this game would look in Kansas? Maybe Buffalo does put more pressure on Kansas City offensively. I will say, when these two met in the regular season, the Buffalo Bills handed Kansas City one of their two losses. Obviously, Kansas City only lost two times. One of them was to Buffalo. The other one was to the Denver Broncos. To the Denver Broncos, which elevated them into the wild card and bounced out the Cincinnati Bengals. That was, now none of that matters now. But the Kansas City Chiefs, in my opinion, I think are like as healthy as they're going to get. You have Patrick Mahomes, who right now, from the high ankle sprain he had earlier in the season, seems to be pretty healthy and he's moving around a lot better. Travis Kelce is starting to come into Travis Kelce form, where now he just needs to really put in his best plays in the next two games, in theory, this game, and then potentially the Super Bowl if they do make it. Again, like I mentioned, you have Hollywood Brown that has now been integrated back into this team, and he's somebody that could be a very good route runner, a very good pass catcher when they need it in crucial downs. DeAndre Hopkins, who was touted as one of the top 5 receivers when in his prime, strictly because of his route running and his catching ability. I still believe that he could be super effective if he is a player that they need. And then you have Isaiah Pacheco, who is back. You have Kareem Hunt, who is a pretty good 1-2 combo. Their offensive line is pretty good, and that defense for Kansas City can get after you. They have a pass defense that is very good defensively and causes a lot of fits, and arguments could be made that this is probably the strongest defense that we've seen Kansas City have during their Super Bowl runs. And that's what Buffalo has to go against. And this is again in Kansas. The Chiefs, I think, are a little bit more amped up because they are playing for the opportunity to be in the Super Bowl for the third consecutive year and to be the first team ever to three-peat. No one in the history of the game has done that. So with those metrics, I'm going to say that I have the Kansas City Chiefs defeating the Buffalo Bills in Kansas, and they're going to move on to the Super Bowl. That would be a Super Bowl rematch between Kansas City and the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think that's going to be a very good one. And whenever we have final scores from these two conference championship games, and we actually do have the Super Bowl, then I'll probably give a proper prediction. But for now, my prediction would be I have the Eagles winning in the NFC Championship game, and I have the Chiefs winning in the AFC Championship game to meet in the Super Bowl. So that would be my prediction. So I think it's going to be very interesting. To be truthful, the last couple of weeks of NFL football have been really fun. Wild card was a little okay. Obviously, some of the games were a bit of a blowout, and then other games were really competitive. But divisional round was probably some of the best football we've seen all season, with a lot of stakes at hand. And now these conference championship games, obviously, you can sink your teeth in. They're going to be very, very good. I do have a couple of things that I think I would want to question a little bit when it comes to Kansas City a little bit. As everyone knows, and I just said multiple times, is Kansas City is looking to go for their third Super Bowl in a row. No Super Bowl, no winning team or no dynasty has ever won 3 Super Bowls in a row to three-peat. There's been several back-to-backs, obviously a couple of one-off championships here and there. New England Patriots are probably the most synonymous with Super Bowls, as Tom Brady's a 7-time champion, but he had a couple of back-to-backs, some long breaks in between winning another Super Bowl, and then he had the last one in Tampa Bay. So Kansas City is really the team that has, for the better part of 7 years, I think, has been the best team in all of football to be in their 7th conference championship game, potentially could be in their 5th consecutive Super Bowl, I think is the number, which is 4th Super Bowl in a row, or they're something weird like that, something crazy. But it does leave the question, though, a lot of questions on whether or not Travis Kelce is going to retire, because obviously with him and Taylor Swift, there's even rumors that they're already engaged, and she's remodeling a home to make it a bigger home for that way they can settle down together, and potential marriage on top of that. A lot of questions on Andy Reid. How much longer is he going to continue to coach? Because now an argument could be made as he's probably in the realm of one of the best coaches to be in the NFL. And not to disrespect, Don Shula or Bill Belichick, it's just Andy Reid on 2 different franchises has made them perennial playoff teams, with the Eagles constantly in the conference championship game, made 1 Super Bowl appearance, but now with the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously he's a 3-time champion currently, and he's going for a 4th championship while on the team. And you look at Patrick Mahomes looking to get his 4th Super Bowl since being with the Chiefs as well. And so I think the big question is if, let's fast forward in the future. Let's say that the Chiefs have won the Super Bowl. They're the first 3-peat champions in the NFL's history. Now what? And I think what we would see is, Travis Kelce step away. I think he would retire. There's really nothing else to play for. Not only have you passed up Tony Gonzalez in the Kansas City Chiefs franchise for most catches, yards, touchdowns, you're now in the upper echelon of Hall of Fame tight ends. Travis Kelce, probably to all accounts, is top 3 in all-time tight ends. And a lot of people would say he's probably number 1 or number 2, depending on who you would side over, Gronkowski or Travis Kelce. And that's just an honest fact of what the ranking is amongst the all-time great tight ends, is Travis Kelce, what he's done to the game. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes in his short time has 3-time champion, has never not been in the playoffs, has never not been in the AFC Championship game, and has an opportunity to, at the end of this season, win his 4th Super Bowl ring. How many years does he want to play? He's already got 4 in, 8 or 9 seasons that he's been the starter. Andy Reid, how many years is he going to coach? What I think is going to happen is I think Andy Reid and Travis Kelce will walk away. I think that they will both retire because Andy Reid What else does he have to prove if he becomes a 4-time Super Bowl champion? Is he going for Bill Belichick's all-time wins? Is he going for Don Shula's? Is he going for Papa Bear, so to speak, his all-time coaching record? Is he coaching for now regular season wins? I don't think so. I think Andy Reid is probably looking to see like when he can step away and no longer be a coach, because now he not only has he gotten to the mountaintop, he's repeating it now. This is an annual thing for them. And then also too with Travis Kelce, probably doesn't want to continue to play even after they become Super Bowl champions, because now he's a 4-time champion in the conversation of one of the all-time great tight ends, and probably, like, to a lot of people, a very good, all-time player amongst all positions. 4-time champion if they do win the Super Bowl. So what does Travis Kelce have left to play for? So not only do you remove those two, but now you have only Patrick Mahomes with this team. One, if Andy Reid steps away, who's the head coach going to be? Who is going to be Patrick Mahomes' new go-to target to bail him out? Also, how many years does Patrick Mahomes want to continue to play? Does he want to play 10 plus years, 15 plus years? Does he want to be in that realm of like length of playing time? Because maybe, is he even in the all-time great conversation in terms of quarterbacks overall in the short span of his career that we've never seen this kind of accolades before, but certainly not even anywhere close to the accolades that Tom Brady has. But with what Patrick Mahomes has done, what else does he want to do? What else does he have to prove? Is he going to call it an early career or anything of that nature? And then I would have a question too. Let's just say Patrick Mahomes wants to continue to play football for the Kansas City Chiefs moving forward without Andy Reid, without Travis Kelce, and whoever else is not going to stay within Kansas City, within Kansas City after they've all kind of like, moved on, because now what's the point of sticking together? What are we going to win a 4th championship in a row? That's never been done after we've already done it for 3 consecutive times. So if you got Patrick Mahomes now, the only player left within that team, again, Travis Kelce's gone, Andy Reid's gone, just hypothetical. Can Patrick Mahomes, is he talented enough to now get whatever coach, whatever other weapons that they equip him with, is he now able to win a Super Bowl without Travis Kelce and Andy Reid? I think that's a huge question. I don't know that answer right now. And to be truthful, the reason why I don't know that answer is because I need to know if the Kansas City Chiefs are, one, going back to the Super Bowl for the 3rd consecutive year, and I need to know if they're going to three-peat. Because if they're going to three-peat, then we have all sorts of questions about what's next for Kansas City. And I think that's a huge question. So I think I'm going to close down the episode with this question. If Kansas City had no Travis Kelce and no Andy Reid for Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes essentially is now left with a new coach and whatever other players that they give him, can Patrick Mahomes elevate the Kansas City Chiefs to being a Super Bowl contender or a playoff team? Or is he just a product of good fortune because of what was placed around him? So I'm going to end it on that. Let me know down in this episode what you guys think. I'll post a short on this so that way I get a little bit more conversation going around it. But I think that's a very interesting question that I want to pose about the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty and what that could look like in the future, especially with certain moving parts and all that other kind of stuff. So let me know down below what you guys think. So I do want to sign off and just say I appreciate you guys so much for listening. Again, please go subscribe to the YouTube channel. I will have this episode on YouTube and the audio version, which is available wherever you get your podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeart, Google Cast. So wherever you guys listen, however you may listen, however you may watch, or wherever you may watch, I really appreciate you guys for being supporters of Drew Coat Sports Talk. I give you guys a lot of gratitude, and I really appreciate you guys for being such supporters of Drew and I, even though Drew isn't a part of our episodes as regularly as he would want to. Obviously, like, he is still a huge part of the show, and like me wanting to be the best I can at the show. So that way, you guys enjoy it. He enjoys it, even though he's now having to be more of an audience participant. So I really do appreciate you guys for all the love and support. And again, for all the podcasting folks that I have befriended and interacted with on social media, I really appreciate you guys. So again, please follow us on Drew Code Sports Talk, on Instagram, TikTok while it's still around, Facebook. Threads, Blue Sky, X, you name it, we're there. Please follow us. Be kind to one another, and I will catch you guys on the next episode of Drew Coat Sports Talk. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys, as I said.